how could you have a makeup department and you don't have makeup for every skin in the United States of America? For this television series called Julia, I was contacted by a wonderful man by the name of David Tebbutt. I think David was the head of casting for 20th Century Fox, about a television show starring a black woman who would play a nurse. And so finally, when Hal Kanter agreed, and I agreed, I flew into I flew into Beverly Hills. And I knew that Hal Kanter was not really anxious for me to play this part. And we were meeting in the Polo Lounge. There's so much history in LA for me. And he was sitting at the table, and I walked into the Polo Lounge, and he said to my agent, you see, I want someone who looks like a nice little housewife, like that lady that has just walked in, the one standing there at the door with the plain black dress, which was a Givenchy, by the way, and very little makeup. We had planned that. And her hair is very simple. I was wearing 3 hair pieces. But I walked over the table and I said hello. He made a joke. I laughed, and we were friends. You know, as always, when you're going to see someone about a part, it's very difficult, and I don't do well with interviews or auditions unless I have the words, the script, and I find out who it is that they had in mind for this role, and then I apply whatever it is that I think is applicable for me to the role. So I thought that she should look clean and simple because that's the way she was on the page. Very direct, very uncomplicated young woman. Yes, I like to add my 2 cents in there. I don't think I was aware of the fact that I was the first African-American female to star in her series, because it was not a very complicated thing to do, and I thought that I could pull it off, but I wanted it to be the stepping stone. I suppose we all finally agreed that we felt it was something that would propel the entire industry forward in terms of starring black women, Asian women, so on and so forth. But I didn't think of that when I flew into California to do the role. I wanted to capture the role and then hope to use it for the purpose of moving forward in the industry. Later I learned about this the first time on television. That was new to me. It was not the best time for us to have chosen. I don't think we chose it. Hal and I were the victims of, for lack of a better word, the decisions made by 20th Century Fox, NBC. And we were delighted to be with NBC, 20th Century Fox. But the racial involvement was very minuscule on all television shows. You know, it was absolutely, let's stay away from that. That is too controversial. So we knew that going in, that first you make the success, and then I think most of the producers prayed that their stars were not very verbal, not people who wanted to be on talk shows talking about, well, I think the show should go in the direction of. Those were not comments that were easily adjusted to by the production. The program was based primarily around allowing Black Americans to think higher of themselves, to have a better interpretation of who they are and what they are. But like the government, like the United States government, we ran into some poor leadership there, and for a while it was not really the thing that one said, that you are maybe in agreement with the Black Panthers. But then I had a party at my big Beverly Hills mansion and invited several people from the Black Panthers to be a part of it, to allow them to meet some of the people that I knew, some I didn't know, but I thought they might like to meet. It was a difficult time, and I think if the party accomplished nothing else, it accomplished the fact that some of these men were extremely bright, very handsome, but they were tired of having to fight so many battles with no one there to support them. So maybe we should everything they did was not wonderful, but not anyone who is interested in a political anything. Everything they do is wonderful. It just doesn't happen any place in the world, really. But yeah, I could see some of the good things in the Panthers, and I'm sorry that, as I recall, it ended poorly, badly. Well, you know, it was, they didn't have makeup for Asians. They didn't have makeup for blacks. The studio had only dealt with the little American girls or European girls, all the same color. That was the discussion that we had in the makeup room. We don't have color for a color that is right for you. Wonderful makeup man, Danny Strepek, who said, you know, she said, she's asked if all of the blonde ladies who are shooting here wear the same color makeup, because she's under the impression that they're different color blondes, redheads, brunettes, and that you would have a full, it sounded very accusatory, but I wasn't. I was saying, well, maybe I was. Saying, how could you have a makeup department and you don't have makeup for every skin in the United States of America? Eventually, we hope, we'll come in front of this camera and be a part of what we see on television. But Danny was brilliant, and he knew that change had arrived. Well, that's what Hal and I hoped we were doing. It was a comedy. And the lady who was the head of the comedy, or the star of the show, her skin was black. But I think really Hal handled that very well. Naturally, we had to butt heads once in a while, and I was happy about it, and I think Hal was too. It was a learning process for both of us. Who was he? Where did he come from? What were his activities that led him to want to write this this series? And who am I? Where did I come from? I don't think Hal knew when he wrote this that my mother was a nurse, and that my father didn't want her to be a nurse because he didn't want his wife to work. There were it was interesting learning about each other. When I went to Dynasty?
Yeah, Dynasty.
Oh, Dynasty. Dynasty, I was doing a play in New York, Agnes of God. And when I finished Agnes of God, which is a play that my character, Dr. Fitzgerald, I think, never leaves the stage. It was quite a challenge. Oh, but I loved it. I went home to rest. I couldn't believe that I was still walking. And I began to watch something called soaps at night. And I ran across everything you can possibly imagine, all of them just over the top, and everyone glamorous with football shoulders, and I don't know what the hell the show was all about, but they sure were pretty, you know. So I really wanted to do that. I thought, wouldn't it be nice to do something that's beautiful, mindless, but beautiful, and I could rest my brain for a little bit. Fortunately, Aaron's partner, Aaron Spelling, was in New York when I was doing Agnes of God. So when Aaron was approached, this gentleman said, luck is really, this gentleman said, oh, I just saw her. I just saw her in New York. And that might be interesting. So the next thing I knew, they said, would you come in and say hello? And I did. And when we discussed it, they had all sorts of marvelous ideas, which just, I was a part of the fantasy, and I love being a part of the fantasy. But when we talked about putting the character on paper, now that's the line that I did say, please remember to write. If we're going to make this work with what you have, I think, if I may make this suggestion, that this character should be written the same as you would write for a wealthy white businessman, because she's a total bitch about anything except how do I earn money? And we've been accused of that. So that's how we came up with Dominique Devereux. And she was great fun to play. It's boring when it takes so long, you know, to do the makeup. After the first thrill of the first, I don't know what year, getting up at 5 is it. But that's what television is all about, and it's okay. I set myself up for this. I've been putting on too much makeup since I was about 10 or 12 years old. So, but the thing that was really fun was making all this work. And I slapped Joan, and Joan slapped me, and America went wild that we were just beating on each other. And I thought, isn't that interesting? They like this. What does that say about us? But I loved every moment of it. The whole show, if you really are honest, the whole show was fun. All of it was fun. When someone walked in and said, do you like my new ring? It cost $187 million. And we just picked it out. I think that was Dynasty. I think everyone is fascinated by wealth and also corrupt. And I think people like to see people who are mean to each other. I saw a television show last night, I don't know the name of it, but there's a young lady who's the star, and someone had something to do with the death of her mother, and she's come back to take revenge on that. She's a mean, cold little lady. Everyone in the show is cold and mean. And I decided I'd watch one more segment to see if somebody would smile. And they didn't. It's all very quick and very, very covered and very... I wanted somebody to walk in and say, hi, Mom, or hi, Dad, I'm home. No, those days are gone. Shonda Rhimes is quite phenomenal. And quite frankly, I was attracted to anything that had her name on it. She is this kind of creativity that understands where she came from as well as what is going on in the whole business world of television and film. When I read the character, yes, I understood her. She was definitely a controlling mother who wanted more control. And I have that very problem. I think most mothers do, but I'm not wonderful about that. I do have that problem. And I wanted to watch Chandra work. I wanted to see her on that stage and watch her as she operated behind the camera, behind the scenes, but being the motivating force for all of it. And she's quite something, very quiet. I've never heard her raise her voice. Her dignity is in her hello. And you have to deal with her on her terms, but then you realize that her terms are very well researched, very well educated, very well learned. So she's not asking you to step down to anything. She's presenting a human being who has stepped up and brought her part of television with her. So it's always an honor to this woman who is so prepared to be a part of it. That was why I really wanted to be there. I think so. I don't care what color you get as Shonda Rhimes, you should take her, because, yeah, she's brilliant, and she understands some of the values that we have had to do without, that need to be a part of what we see on television. You know, Anthony Hopkins did say, this is not brain surgery, you know, this is, and I studied extensively. Do you mind? I've lost you, and I need you. I suppose we all have a technique. We don't want to call it that, but it's impossible for us to be exposed to other actors, different projects, so on, without something being embedded into our everything, our lives, our character, and we use that. How we use it is what is different. How that same kernel really applies to all of us. Actors are usually learning all the time, constantly, when they're driving a car, whatever they do. And that's why most of us are so immature. We're just constantly dealing with something that, oh, we remembered. And the real life, I'm very proud of women who marry, have children, and stay married, understanding that this is a part of life, and this is, I mean, the career is a part of life, but this is the real substance of who we are. Many of us marry and have children, but it's really, we don't know how to carry it to its fruition. And there's some of us who are just actors all the time. I shall say no more than that. I think the first, my first learning lesson about being in front of an audience, the in-person appearances, was the nightclub industry, except when I was a child and I enjoyed doing it in elementary school. That's when my parents found out that they were very much in trouble about this thing called show business, because I wanted to do everything. I wanted to be in front of the people. I wanted to make my costume. I wanted to sing. I wanted to act. I wanted to do it all. But eventually, they became very supportive. But the relationship between the audience and the nightclub performer has an intimacy that is a wonderful training ground for, of course, doing theater. And the connection, if that's where you were trained, and that's definitely where I would say I was trained, is it becomes visceral, and it's something, once again, that you carry with you into whatever work you're doing that involves acting or relating. They're very closely, but they're different. But whatever it is that is about them, that they support each other. The work supports constantly. If I'm doing television and I'm missing my audience, I think that it is because I'm not working deeply. the camera can get in the way, but it's my responsibility to make the camera disappear. I've been doing a television show recently. It's called White Collar, and I'm enjoying it because all of it was so new to me. It was so difficult for me to take the years that I've had and apply them to this job, to this acting. It was, the sound of everyone was different. It was fast, quick, not so beautifully articulated. And the sets were, a lot of the sets are magnificent on the show. And the writing is very good. You have to really be careful that you don't overdo. The writing is there. So now you were asking me about in person and on camera. They're first cousins, but they're different. I think that your audience is much more. They're much brighter. They are very often very educated people, as opposed to when I started. It was, oh, she's watching that silly thing called television. Not today. Our information, everything is technical. So learning about the mind of the young man who created White Collar at, 30, 31, is my responsibility. I didn't know that. I didn't know how much I needed to know about him so that we could both understand what is on that piece of paper that he has written. And I learned through him. He was kind enough to help me through that. Jeff Easton, he's a genius. And watching the other actors on the set, I'm the oldest one in the world there. And watching them is like really, it is examining, can you hear them? Do you hear? And are you perceiving the subtle changes in this art form called acting? Because you can walk on with a kind of arrogance. Well, I've been around longer than anyone else here, and I can adapt, and I can. It's much more complicated than that. It's much more. One needs to be much more. To be absolutely prepared to be more perceptive than one may have expected. When they were creating White Collar, I gathered, because I met a gentleman in a restaurant when I was there shooting my very first episode, and he said, "I'm so glad you're with us, because this segment that refers to the Rat Pack, as soon as they told me that they wanted a woman to be a part of this," I said, "Well, there's only one woman alive who remembers all of that, and her name is Diahann Carroll." And I said, "Thank you so much, because it's a joy." That was during the time that our lead was expressing his admiration for Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. And Matt he's a very talented actor. And so we met in a secondhand store where I was getting rid of all of my memorabilia about the Rat Pack. And I was attracted to a man that young who remembered and was fascinated by it. So that's how our relationship began. And I took him to this wonderful Whitestone that obviously my husband gave, I don't know, yes, he did. And I said to him, "You can live upstairs, and it'll be great to have someone in the house." And then the relationship began to unfold, and she became like a big sister, and then on some occasions really like a mom. And there there is a sweetness about this young man, who, by the way, was just released from jail on the day that we met, that that is very appealing, even though he's a thief. But I'm enjoying it very much, watching how these youngsters do this. And to me, they are youngsters. Forgive me for saying that, but they are. And I think I can say that now. Don't you think so? I think I'm entitled to say that. But the whole experience is something I really was not prepared for. But I'm enjoying it very much. Well, Julia would be just where I am. She'd be looking for her 77th birthday. And probably, I hope she would have moved up in the ranks of aerodynamics or whatever it was called. And maybe she runs the place. You can see I have a great need to run, to control. It's not an attractive need, but it's there. And what would she do? Something quite outstanding, I think. And she had a great need to be this first nurse in the original concept of Julia. I remember the funny line when she says, "Dr. Chegley, has anyone told you that I'm colored?" And he said, "Oh, what color are you?" Well, that was very funny. Big laugh, big. So just as that has gone by the wayside and other things I think Julia has kept up with the time, and she's probably has a grown son who is, 50-something. Maybe she's a grandma. But I think she's still working. I find that very often when I'm on the road traveling and giving speeches, that I meet a lot of young women who say to me, I wanted to know if you were real. At first, I really didn't understand that. And then, as I began to think about it, I had the same reaction when I was a youngster. And I saw certain people, and particularly I was interested if they were black males or females in this industry. But in the early days, I would have to say Lena Horne, but my mother allowed me to see so little of Lena's work because she felt that early on I would have to contend with comparisons, and I'm sure she's absolutely correct. I mean, of course, any black woman who looked lovely in clothes or whatever was going to be compared to Lena Horne because there was no other comparison at hand. You know, I'm trying to remember the most moving in my young life. On stage, on television, so many of them come to mind, but I can't single out one. Arthur Godfrey was quite a character, and I thought he was wonderful. So my mother took me to this audition. That's why I was there, yes. And my mother was a very, very pretty lady. And I'm expecting him to be overwhelmed by this incredible talent that I'm going to put at his feet. And the only thing he can say to me is, "Your mother is very beautiful. She's very pretty." And then he said something that was just a little bit off, that it was a little bit inappropriate. And I said, you know, you can't do that. That's my mother, and you can't do that. And he was a bit surprised, you know. racially, we were in a very different time. And this is a white Southern male. And I'm a New York girl. And New Yorkers say what they have to say. All of us, no matter what color we are. And so I said, you have to stop that. You know, it's just, I don't like it, and it's making my mother uncomfortable. And the reason I think it's important to remember is that at that moment, there was no doubt in his mind that I was on my way home. Goodbye, thank you. That I would have done that had he not acquiesced. So that's my story. I didn't think about it for one moment. I just said it. Very often, he's not the only person that said something about how beautiful my mother was, and they did not say it in a manner that made me comfortable. And I told them. She was like this fragile thing who couldn't really. I was a little more articulate. Great to say, who the hell do you think you're talking to? That could come out of me too. But it was cute with Arthur Godfrey because he was really stunned, absolutely stunned. I was not a domestic. That was the problem, and that's something that we overcame by 20th Century and NBC deciding to present this show with a woman who was a nurse. That's very nice, and I'm happy that we moved to the nurse. But we have to move on now, and I have to run the hospital or own the hospital, something simple like that. But yes, it felt good to know that I'd broken some barrier. I did Agnes of God, first black actress to replace a white actress in a production that would have been called a white production of Agnes of God. And a few other, and on Dynasty, I think there's something about a black actress never starring on a soap, nighttime soap. It all sounds wonderful, and I'm thrilled. But what took us so long? And now we can see the pretty black girls coming out of everywhere. I'm going to kill them.